Good morning. Why don't we get started? This is the press conference that I have before a legislative meeting. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council, and tomorrow, Tuesday, May 2nd, will be the 6th legislative meeting of the Council of the District of Columbia. It will be preceded by a committee of the whole meeting scheduled to start at 11 o'clock in the morning. There are a couple items for markup in the committee of the whole, 3 to be specific, and I don't think any of them are controversial. We will then go into the legislative meeting and to go through that agenda quickly. And of course, I'll take questions on any aspect of the agenda. We will be, assuming this gets out of the committee of the whole, we'll be confirming the nomination by the Commission on Arts and Humanities of new Executive Director Aaron Myers, who is a performing artist and has been active in the arts community for a number of years and has been nominated by the commission to be the next executive director. And we've had a hearing. There was no opposition at the hearing. And so I expect that will move through tomorrow. We have a bunch of contracts that are on the agenda for tomorrow. I don't think any of them are controversial. I believe every one of them is slightly retroactive, which is an issue of concern to me. I'm not quite sure why the executive is slipping with regard to getting contracts to the council timely. And all of these contracts, I believe, are slightly retroactive. I say slightly, meaning a month or two after the contract performance began. What's of greater concern is the continuing problem with the DC Public Schools. We had a hearing on February 10th in which we identified roughly a half dozen contracts that were not just retroactive, but like seriously retroactive, like months and months and months, like half a year retroactive. These were the food service contracts in particular. And what we identified at the hearing was that not only did DCPS not get around to even sending the contracts to us for roughly 6 months, but they had been paying on the contracts which had not been approved by the council. One of the contracts had been initially entered into at just over $1 million, and payments were made, although they were like thinking they were avoiding because it was just around $1 million. That was the, if I remember correctly, the DC Central Kitchen. The other Sodexo Marriott it's like a $35 million contract. It's pretty offensive to the council, the legislative process, and the home rule that DCPS was that flagrantly in disregard of the contract review process, which everyone well knows because it's been law for decades. But more than that, DCPS was unaware of all the contracts that it had entered into that were over $1 million that should have come to us. The information they gave us was incomplete and inaccurate. It subsequently took them several weeks to come up with a list of, I hope you're all sitting, 36 contracts, 36 over the last 3 years that were over $1 million that had not come to the council. Many of these contracts, maybe 24 of them, had already completed their term, which raises the questions, of course, why the chief financial officer is authorizing payments on contracts that have not been properly approved, which seems to me is an issue for the annual audit. So most recently, DCPS has been pressing me as chair of the committee of the whole, which has oversight over DCPS, to move tomorrow 6 contracts and be saying that those companies could not make payroll. We asked for information. They didn't get us the information, but they still were pressing that we put it on the agenda, even though they're not giving us information or the supporting documents. And then it turns out that at least 2 of the contracts that can't make payroll have been getting payments this year, at least 2 of them. And so that once again raises the question of why payments are being made by the chief financial officer on contracts that have not come to the council, especially after this issue was raised in February. So one of those contracts, DCPS contracts, are on the agenda for tomorrow. But there are, as I said, 14 contracts that I believe every one of them is somewhat retroactive. With regard to emergencies, we have 7 emergencies on the agenda. Just for anyone who's watching, emergencies or bills are temporary in nature. That is 90 days. Often they're accompanied by a temporary bill, which is 225 days, but goes to the Hill. The 90-day bills do not, but they require 2/3 vote. Food delivery fees, transparency, emergency is back on the agenda. This got stalled at the last meeting. There was some uneasiness on the part of members. I believe an amendment nature of a substitute will be circulated today. I am told secondhand that the bill now has support of the Restaurant Association, which was one of the concerns raised last month. There also are a couple of emergencies dealing with the Housing Authority. There's not really anything new there. They, I believe what they do is they put in place or renew measures that we had adopted on a temporary basis last December. You all remember there was some controversy about restructuring the Housing Authority Board. And this is just continuing decisions that we made last fall. There also is on the agenda as an emergency, the redesignation of Good Hope Road as Marionberry Avenue. It's on an as an emergency basis because the public needs to know that this is an official name change, and therefore everyone on Good Hope Road is going to have to change their address. The bill includes a provision that individuals have to, for example, change their driver's license because they have a new address, that there will not be a cost to the individual resident. Same for businesses who may have to change documents. That with the government, it will not be a cost, but they will need to do this, and that's why we're getting this in place now. The name change is effective July 1st. And I'm highlighting here so anyone who's watching this is aware that residents and businesses on Good Hope Road will have to change their addresses before July 1st. As I said, I'm happy to take questions on any aspect of the agenda, but I wanted to touch on a couple of other issues. As you all know, there was a third resolution introduced in Congress a couple months ago now to override or reject one of the bills that we had adopted. The council adopted, I believe, unanimously a police accountability bill last fall. And there was actually this time, unlike with the other two bills, there was actually a hearing that the House Oversight Committee had. I commend them for having a hearing. I think they expected to excoriate me and Councilmember Allen and the Chief Financial Officer for a poorly run city and a lawlessness attitude. I think we showed them everything to the contrary. And that bill, the override resolution, as you know, passed the House on a party line vote. Before the Senate, I do not expect that the schedule will allow the Senate to vote on to override. So I'm feeling more comfortable, even though I am in the process of meeting with members of Congress about that bill, the police accountability bill, and just more generally improving our relations with Congress, given the recent hostility toward us. I do want to say, though, that we realized with one of the previous bills that was not overridden, although there was an effort to, that Congress has a different notion about how to count the days for a 30 or 60-day review. And by our count, this police accountability bill is now law. And that's because the Home Rule Act states quite explicitly that the 30 or 60 days starts on the date that we transmit. And we, meaning the Secretary's office, is very meticulous about documenting when we transmit. And I believe the difference is that the parliamentarian calculates based on the date of publication in the Congressional Register, which is a completely arbitrary date. Regardless, we don't think that the Senate schedule will permit an action in the Senate. And my conversations have suggested that there's less concern about the possibility of an override in the Senate. Lastly, I wanted to touch on our schedule. The council members will be meeting informally this Wednesday in a working session to discuss what the committees did last week with their recommendations for the budget. This is an informal meeting of council members, so it is, because it's a majority of the council members, maybe all, it's an open meeting. It'll be televised, but it will be in the chairman's conference room, and therefore attendance, but you all know this is a little bit challenging, but If you can get in there, you can get in there, and some of you know how to do that. That's next Wednesday, and then on May 16th, we will have our first vote. That's the 56th day, I believe, after we got the budget from the mayor, although it's debatable whether the mayor actually transmitted the budget, and it's entirely on March 22nd. And then our second vote will be on May 30th on the budget for 2024, the revised budget, which we call the supplemental budget for 23, the federal budget request act. That's on May 30th. The second vote on the Budget Support Act will be in June. That's a much more complex document and takes a little bit longer. So that's our schedule. And with that, I'm happy to take questions.
Just real quick on the contracts. I know that also in your committee report for the budget, you mentioned these 36 contracts from DCPS that had been submitted retroactively, or they'd started kind of paying out despite the fact that the council hadn't approved them. You even mentioned that there was a potential anti-deficiency violation, which to my knowledge, I don't remember the last time there was one of these. I mean, are there consequences for these things? I mean, if it's effectively DCPS is spending money that it's not legally allowed to spend because the council hasn't approved it.
Yes, okay. There are two anti-deficiency laws. There's the federal one and there's the district one. And they're worded slightly different. The district one very clearly says that money cannot be paid without the expenditure having been properly authorized. The fact that the contracts have not been approved means that the expenditures have not been properly authorized. So there's, in my view, a very clear violation of the district's Anti-Deficiency Act. There is a board of anti-deficiency review, and I have been pressing whether they have met. I'm told that they either have or will meet, and that would be one step in my view. There's also it's called PARC, which the mayor set up to look at contracts that have been, or the process where contracts have not been submitted to the council timely. And supposedly those reviews have been taking place. I've also pressed the chancellor. I sent him a letter last week asking once again what disciplinary action is being taken. Michael.
Chairman, starting to talk about the budget a little bit, you mentioned there's a work session Wednesday. Can you offer your first impression of some of the moves that the committees have made, at least that you're aware of, if there's any big moves that you disagree with, or what are your thoughts so far?
I think I'm going to keep to myself for the moment any moves that I disagree with. There were quite a number that I thought were appropriate. For instance, I think Councilmember McDuffie's efforts to restore the funding for the baby bonds. The challenge there, so baby bonds is the short name for a program where the government creates an account and puts aside $1,000 a year for any child born in the district in poverty. And this is $1,000 a year until they're 18, at which point they can access the money, which accrues some interest, and use it for specified purposes, all related to wealth building, such as creating a business or getting a college education. This could be a game changer in terms of wealth building for individuals who are born into poverty. Our country has struggled for decades to end the cycle of poverty. Our country has not done a very good job about it. And this is, I think, an innovative strategy. It's not a new idea. Cory Booker has been trying to get the Congress to pass such legislation. The funding was taken away, and Councilmember McDuffie has worked quite arduously to restore the funding for that program. A challenge is that it has a long horizon. So individuals won't see benefit until 18 years. And so there are some voices who are saying, well, we have needs now, but the needs we have now, as great as they are, as important as they are, don't have that investment quality or that ability to change the cycle of poverty. So that's just one example that I very much approve of.
I guess sticking with, voices that might disagree with how the council is gonna plan money short-term and long-term. Can you offer a reaction to the Bowser administration's framing of certain issues so far? They're having a press conference today that's talking about saving downtown in the face of some proposals out of the Transportation Committee. And there's been other commentary about irresponsible decision makings in the part of council committee.
Well, I think the mayor would do well to sit down with me and other members of the council as a group and talk about these strategies rather than just going off and having a confrontative press conference. But I will say this, and that is I'm disappointed with some of the so-called strategies to turn around downtown when so much of it is very long-term in its effect and therefore really doesn't turn around downtown in the time frame that's needed. So let me say a little bit more. We're all concerned that downtown has not seen the revival of business activity that we've seen in commercial corridors outside of downtown. And that's primarily because of the federal government not bringing its workforce back and other businesses with teleworking. So there are far fewer people downtown. I'm not saying anything we don't know. It's very concerning. And so when the mayor talks about a strategy like, well, we're going to change certain processes so that we can get more residential housing downtown, that's going to take 5 to 10 years. And I'm not saying anything against residential downtown. I've been a long supporter, longer than anybody else on the council, about having residential downtown. But revitalizing downtown is something that has to happen in the next year or two. And so I think the mayor's press conference, as I understand it, of course, she hasn't talked to me about it, nor has she talked to me about the issues that she's concerned about, as I understand it secondhand, but something like the K Street Transitway, what I have heard from the business community, other aspects of the business community, more folks in the business community, office building owners, some organizations that represent, commercial activity or retail activity, is that the last thing they want is to see the street in front of their businesses torn up for 2 years right now. What I've also heard from some business organizations is that the Transitway is based on a 10-year-old plan that not only predates the pandemic, but predating the pandemic. And, so maybe that needs to be rethought, updated, kind of reflect changes that have happened, including our effort to promote more bus transit with the fare-free buses. So the plan needs some refreshing, and stores don't need to have the pavement in front of their door torn up for 2 years, not right now. But if the strategy to revise or revitalize downtown is to build a transitway that would be finished in 5 or 6 years, once again, it misses the mark. The mark is now, next year. It's not 5 years from now.
Sure. Hi, Chairman. This is Hector Arzate from WAMU. I know that you all are looking at, the migrant services amendment, or have been. Sorry. Well, I spoke to immigrant advocates over the weekend and actually met with families. They're telling me that DHS and OMS has run out of funds to place families in shelters and hotels, and they're actually calling on council to ask for Bowser to help release some of those funds. Is this something that the council is aware of and working on, can work on?
I'm aware of the concern. There's not been a proposal put to the council by the executive. I cannot speak to whether The Housing Committee, which has jurisdiction over this, I can't speak to how much they've been looking at this. So there's a very legitimate concern. There's not a quantified solution or need or request at this point, and we need that in order to be able to act on it. The mayor does have access to contingency funds for contingency situations, such as what's been speculated is going to happen with the change in federal immigration regulation, and whether that will result in more of these migrants being bused to the district. I do want to this is an opportunity to remind folks that this is a problem of humanity that the district wants to be responsive to, but is not of our making. It is the governors from Texas and Arizona, and I think Florida, who have thought it best to treat migrants, I would say inhumanely, by just putting them on buses and sending them north. And that's wrong and wrong and wrong and inhumane, and the district will do what it can to help. Thank you. Haven't seen you in a few years.
It's a pandemic. I can blame you. Question about the mayor's K Street Transit plan and her news conference today. Can you sort of put it in perspective as to if that money for that project goes away, is that money and then Brianna Nadeau's plan on or proposal for a $2 fee for rideshare, is that where the money's going to go to try and get or to fund, I should say, the free Metro bus throughout the city?
Well, Councilmember Nadeau's proposal, which is this congestion fee, she proposed that help to fund part of this fare free bus bill that we passed last fall. That I should remind folks was funded, fully funded, and the CFO decided that for some reason the dollars weren't there, which is not his call. When I disagreed with him, his staff said, well, let's go to the Attorney General and see whose opinion is right. And the Attorney General agreed with the council, but the CFO said the money was not there anyway. Councilmember Nadeau's proposal would help to fund that. There was more to your question.
The K Street Transit
Yes.
plan. If that
And-
goes away, would that money go towards the free Metro bus?
Yes, that was the proposal from Councilmember Allen.
Okay. My next question is, do you have the support of the Metro Board and Randy Clark for this plan for free Metro bus?
We developed the plan working closely with Randy Clark and his staff last November, December. With regard to the board, I don't know. I've not talked to the board.
So what if you don't have the support of the board, if they don't want it?
Then I will be happy to talk with them about it. This is, in my view, a DC decision because it deals with DC buses.
So it's your belief that Randy Clark is behind the plan?
This is what I said. And it suggests the answer to your question is yes, that the plan that we adopted last fall was developed in close consultation with Randy Clark.
All right, let me ask you about the police accountability bill. Is it,
Although I think I want to say a little bit more because
Okay.
there've been some criticism about this fare free buses. This fare free bus proposal, which the council adopted unanimously last December. I want to say this is not just a proposal. This is something that actually is law adopted by the council. Mayor allowed it to become law. Is possibly one of the biggest moves we're making toward equity, other than the baby bonds. One of the biggest moves toward equity that the council has adopted in years. And that's because overwhelmingly low-income residents of the district rely on Metrobus. And this makes that bus service free. It is also good in a number of other ways, just making transit, public transit, more accessible, more reliable, quicker and more reliable. Why would I say that? Because if you think about it, one of the greatest delays in bus service is people getting on the bus and paying their fare. Although I will say, somebody might be thinking about fare jumping, that this bill also gets rid of the problem of fare. I shouldn't say this bill, this law or policy gets rid of the problem of fare jumping. The benefits of this are huge in so many ways. And I will just remind folks that for the last several years, the mayor's been proposing fare-free circulator. And the reason why the council didn't go along with that was partly because we thought there were higher priorities for the money, and also because circulator doesn't serve DC residents as much as the Metro bus does. So, if there are folks in Maryland and Virginia who don't like this, I would say maybe it's because they're jealous. But this is only about DC buses that run only in DC.
Can I ask you about the police accountability
Sure.
bill? I'm going from memory on some of this, and I have a document also that I'm going by. Do you have to have a final vote this June to have because it was originally passed as an emergency bill, wasn't it, in
The
2020?
police accountability?
Yeah,
What's on the Hill right now is the permanent bill. We don't have to have another vote.
you don't have to have another vote.
Correct.
Okay. Was there final language added to it that makes it a serious use of force if officers box in, caravan, deploy a roadblock, or deploy a tire deflation device and paralleling? Are you familiar with that?
My safest answer is no. I'm not familiar enough with it to answer.
Okay. So other than the Senate, if the Senate doesn't pick it up and vote against it like the House did, it's a full bill as of
Full law.
it's a
Yeah,
full,
well,
it's
so
a full
we-
law as of, but isn't there a period of time where it's a full law? Isn't it?
I don't believe we have a specified applicability date. I believe it becomes effective as soon as it passes congressional review. So let me say several things. First, most of the bill that's before Congress has been law since 2020. Not all, but most of it. We adopted on an emergency and temporary basis 4 times. And those 4 temporary bills went to Congress with nary a word. So most of the bills are already law. That's the first thing. Second is that by our count, the bill's already law because it's already been there for 60 congressional days. And then, as I said, I believe the effective date is the completion of congressional review.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Wright.
Thank you. Excuse me. First of all, on the 36 DCPS contracts, have you spoken or had contact with the CFO about his paying these?
Yeah, I sent him a
unauthorized?
letter last week.
Okay, and we can have that letter.
If you want, yes.
Yeah, please. Secondly, you spoke about that you've been up to the Hill, I gather. And
Yes.
have spoken to members of Congress, and there are 3 bills that are
That have been subject to override
Right.
resolution.
and the third one is the immigrant voting bill.
Yeah, well, that was the second one.
That was the second one. What is the status of that bill?
It became law 2 months ago.
Okay,
And I believe the committee recommendation from the committee that has jurisdiction over elections was to fund it.
okay. And then the only thing that Congress could do was to do something in appropriations, funding and so forth, if it wanted to take action on that.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about that because I don't want
Okay,
to
I understand.
suggest, I don't want it in the public domain.
Okay. There's going to be a press conference, I guess it's going on now on statehood. You may be aware of it at the National Press Club that Eleanor Holmes Norton is participating in. And there was a conference on Friday in DC Bar. Tom Davis spoke and he said one of the things that DC might consider is working with Puerto Rico because that seems to be trending Republican. DC is Democratic as a path to greater home rule, possibly even stated. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I'm not sure what to say. It sounds similar, what you just suggested, which is trying to get Congress to look at a bill that would pair the district with Puerto Rico, Democrat and Republican jurisdictions is very similar to what was tried in around 2007 with Utah in the district.
Yeah, yes, which was his plan to give us full representation. in the
Yeah,
House.
and I was not averse to that effort in 2007. What tanked it was putting that rider on regarding restricting our ability to regulate or legislate with regard to firearms. If there was a clean bill, that would make it simpler. And on a preliminary conceptual basis, I don't know that I would have a problem with that as an interim step toward statehood. I'm not one who believes that we should do nothing and only get full statehood, because we need to continually expand our franchise and our autonomy. And I believe the more that we expand it, the more it becomes clear that there's no reason not to give us statehood.
Thank you.
Mr. Ostermeal.
Just to follow up on what Paul was starting with, do you support Councilmember Nadeau's idea for this $2 congestion charge, number one? And then number two, one of the criticisms about the way you got money for baby bonds and for the transit way is pulling it from PAYGO capital funding, which you say in your own committee report that the district should use more of because it means you don't pay debt service. How do you square those two things?
I have not settled on a position with regard to the suggestion pricing, and want to see how the discussion goes this Wednesday. With regard to the use of PAYGO, I don't like it. The reality is that in both instances, they concern very large programmatic initiatives that the council adopted as law a year ago, and that the mayor was wrong to take the funding out. Well, actually, it was the CFO was wrong to take the funding out. The CFO was wrong to take the funding out, and with the baby bonds, the mayor was wrong to take the funding out. I'd even go so far as to say on the baby bonds, it was a bit cruel. It's an opportunity to change the outcome of, there's no limit on the number of kids. Any kid who is born in the district in poverty, who lives in the district until they're 18, any kid. So I don't know the number, but it could be thousands. This is an opportunity to change their future. And instead, we just struggle year after year with short-term, almost like Band-Aid steps. And it was just wrong to not fund that. And this was not just a policy idea, it was law. I think you're familiar with this, that the CFO had misstated the financial plan. And that's how the baby bonds, the rationale, how the mayor rationalized killing it. And with the Fair Free, that not only was the CFO wrong, but asked for an attorney general opinion that confirmed that the CFO was wrong. I hope I'm not suggesting some strong opinion here, but
Sticking with the transit way, is there an argument to be made that it's counterintuitive, as you say, when the needs of downtown are urgent and need to be addressed, not by way of proposals that are going to take several years, but more urgently, but by stopping a project that would beautify downtown, make it easier to commute downtown for bus riders and other commuters alike? Isn't that, I don't know, is it short-sighted to dismiss that part of the plan, even though it would take several years, if the effort is to get more people living downtown, working downtown
planning
permanently?
money was left in the capital project. So there's planning money to continue to work on the plan. As I indicated before, the plan is 10 years old. It needs to be looked at, and is it still appropriate given changes that have occurred both in the workplace as well as in transportation? So that's point one. But point two is it just doesn't make sense to jackhammer the sidewalk in front of a retail establishment when you're trying to open or reopen or keep that retail establishment alive. Businesses downtown, retail businesses downtown, many of them are on life support because of the change in teleworking. And we need to get people back downtown now. And the strategies to get people back downtown have to be strategies that have an immediate effect, not a 10-year horizon. So that's two problems with the transit way, three problems with the transit way. The first is that it's not going to benefit downtown in the next couple of years because it has a longer horizon. And I said three. That it could be based on I will say it's based on an outdated assumption. And I don't know why I said three. But I was clear there were three.
Well, I guess I'll follow up and say if there's a fear of disrupting businesses downtown that are on life support, and looking at a potential proposal that would add a small tax, in essence, a fee for Lyft and Uber rides into the downtown corridor, isn't that suggesting there's an opposite problem, that there's too many cars going downtown? It just seems difficult to square these two proposals as meeting the same goal, and one suggests.
No, I'm going to say no. Come on now, because first of all, if you go outside right now, you're going to find that the streets have got a lot of cars in them. Now, I'm not quite sure why, because the buildings don't have a lot of workers in them. It's like there's a paradox right now. There's a lot of traffic. Now, I don't want to get caught in defending the congestion fee, just as I don't want to be caught criticizing it. We'll see what members say on Wednesday. And in fact, if the premise of your question is correct, that there isn't that much congestion downtown, then it won't bring in that much money. There is the argument that's critical of the congestion fee, that we don't need to be adding costs downtown. I don't know how much that will, I don't know how correct that is. I'll acknowledge there is that criticism. But, what needs to happen, for example, is that there ought to be more focus on looking at the vacant retail space, the government working with the landlords to activate with, I'll say, pop-up retail or pop-up arts activities in these retail spaces. Let's work on a subsidy program for that, for example. Or that the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development focuses more on programs that encourage, invite, incentivize to actually host street activities downtown during the weekend for sure, but maybe even during the week. We don't want a barbecue festival or barbecue, whatever it is, that closes down Pennsylvania Avenue in the middle of the week, but something like that brings a lot of people downtown. Things like that, or doing more to support the arts organizations downtown, which includes museums, so that we have people coming down here when they leave the National Theater after a performance, they look for and go to a restaurant downtown, which then, of course, encourages more restaurant activities like that. That's short term. But talk about changing the zoning and the Hyde Act so that we can build some buildings that'll be done 10 years from now. That's just the wrong timing.
Well, I had heard that part of the DEMPED cuts to make way for baby bonds money, cut money for the city's festival fund, money for organizations that want to host events but can't afford public safety. Are you aware of that proposal out of DEMPED?
Well, this is part of what's going to be discussed more fully on Wednesday. And it may be that there were a couple of cuts that need to be reversed. We'll see how that discussion goes on Wednesday. But generally, what I have found is that there hasn't been a very good effort on the part of the government to focus on incentivizing activities that bring people downtown. Downtown. That's where our need is.
Thanks.
I think I've exhausted all the questions. Thank you all very much. See you tomorrow at 11.